Essentially, if you understand Hamas's strategy, they cannot win on the ground. They can brag about how, Israeli soldiers coming into Gaza will die and it'll be their grave and so on and so forth, but they know that's nonsense. The Israelis know that's nonsense. What they do know is that they can win on the media battlefield. And so they needed something. Now, the first thing they had was they had a building that they claimed was hit by an Israeli shell from the coast. That did not fly. They had a whole family dead, and they had dead babies and stuff, but somehow that didn't fly. So that was sort of the Gaza Beach story that they tried to pull, and that didn't work. And so then you got this thing, and from the evidence, they not only fired at the Israelis, but they gathered kids in the courtyard beforehand. They had a whole bunch of kids come because they told them they were helping fortify the place and so on and so forth. And then while the kids were out in the courtyard doing this, they fired at the Israelis. So what you've got essentially is it's a staggering. In fact, it's so unbelievable that a government or a ruling clique would deliberately sacrifice their own civilians for the sake of a PR victory, that it's almost impossible for us to imagine it. And the only reason that it works is because the mainstream media follows up. In other words, it is utterly meaningless to have dead Palestinians if it can't be blamed on Israel. And if the media doesn't do the job of spreading these pictures with the accompanying narrative that it's the Israelis who did it, which is what happened at Gaza Beach. Gaza Beach, a family was killed. There's no question. It wasn't staged like Al-Dura. Gaza Beach was a dead family. But the evidence now that has come out that the father was playing with an unexploded ordnance and it blew up in his face. They were able to blame the Israelis, and that's what they need, and they need the media to do that, and the media does it. So on some level, I would say, even more than the Palestinians who, I regret to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway, have the moral sort of reasoning of a temper tantrum throwing 5-year-old, the media, which believes that they represent the highest level of morality, is actually probably the most responsible for the systematic victimization of the Palestinian people by their leadership.
People sometimes may forget that you're a scientist, a historian, you study cultures. What is it about the Arab mindset that would permit this? I know that Americans would never use children as a human. Americans would never do this. Canadians would never do this. Australians wouldn't do this. Europeans wouldn't use their children.
I would go so far as to say most, even tribal warrior cultures would not do this. This is a pathology. This is not normal behavior. Now, granted that in history, many ruling elites have ruled by being willing to be ruthless with their own civilian population. So, the famous remark by Napoleon when there was a protest outside the Tuileries, and he brought out the cannons and gave them a whiff of grape shot. And that was the end of it. That was the last sort of, mob expression during the French Revolution. And Machiavelli talks about it. It's called the economy of violence. So you have that. But the idea of actually victimizing your own children in order to gain a PR advantage, that is a modern pathology that's a combination of two things. One, it's the result of the pathological turn the Palestinian or Arab culture took after what they call the Nakba of 1948. This was such a mind-boggling humiliation that this subject people, dhimmi people, the Jews, who in the entire history of Islam had never been a sovereign power, this scraggly band of 1.5 million Jews would be able to take on 7 Arab armies was just so humiliating it could not be absorbed. And so instead of what happens normally if you start a zero-sum game like war and you lose, which is that you acknowledge you've lost and you move on, instead of doing that, they refused to recognize Israel. They refused to recognize that they had lost. They considered the battle still going. And as a result, they were in this impossible situation, which took many decades to dawn on them, that they were not going to defeat the Israelis militarily. And at that point, well, actually earlier, but it develops more and more over time, they started to use the media card, because what they found, particularly amongst the Europeans, was a media that was avid for images of Jews doing bad things. And I think that, excuse me, I think that this is one of the core issues in this, that the Europeans must get a hold of if they are going to survive into the 21st century. And that is, they must get a hold of their unbelievable appetite for images of Jews doing badly, because it is so important for them to feel morally superior to the Jews. It's so important for them to be able to point the finger at Jews and say, you Jews, 2,000 years, you were oppressed, and 2,000 years other people did nasty things to you, namely our ancestors, and now no sooner do you get power than you turn around and do it to the Palestinians. You're just as bad as all those people who made the Jews suffer, even the Nazis. In fact, you're worse than the Nazis. And that's what they did with this image of Muhammad al-Dura. Muhammad al-Dura was the get-out-of-Holocaust guilt-free card. This one picture of a boy who wasn't even, but at worst, we got one kid killed in a crossfire in a battle, becomes the replacement for the image of the boy in the Warsaw Ghetto. So he becomes the replacement for a picture that symbolizes the deliberate murder of 6 million civilians. Now, when a well-respected French anchorwoman says that, we're talking about somebody who is morally delirious. And that's the real problem, because the Palestinians and the Arabs understand that there's this huge appetite in the West for wanting to feel morally superior to the Jews, and therefore any image that they provide of Jews behaving immorally, they know that the Western media will leap at it, even if it's a false image.